Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Ooh, good morning.
Good morning.
That's warmer because when I walked in the place, one of the things I first said is that it's a very warm, intimate, rich space. And so I'm hoping that we can keep that energy going and that this can be somewhat of an interactive conversation. I'll be doing more of the talking on the front end, but I want us to be able to take an intimate journey into some of the thoughts that came up when I seen the image roots. And some of you might be a little afraid of take an intimate journey in my brain. My husband's like, you don't want to go there. He's sitting over here. So I'm appreciative of my husband and friends coming. And I'll try to move to navigate this pillar a little bit. And the other thing I'll just say before I start sharing some of my thoughts is the longer I walk this earth, this land, it is even more clear to me how precious time is and how critical relationships are. And so I appreciate you yielding the space for me and the time to kind of enter rapport, if only for the next 20 minutes. So I appreciate that, and I don't take it lightly. And so let's continue. I see some of you still doing this. I'm gonna try. So know that I'm trying to be cognizant of it. And I'm standing in front of the projector. But turn your eyes to the screen and see if you can see this picture. Because when I started, and feel free to move to adjust so you can see, but when I first started talking to Emily about this notion of roots, I started brainstorming. So what does that really mean? You know, what associations are cropping up in my brain in terms of words and or images? And so I started to look at trees. In that deep structure which supports trees, the roots. And what became very clear to me right away is that it is a deep structure that's very important, but because it usually is not visible to us, it's easily overlooked, but it's critical. And so that led me, I wish you could see this picture, because when I first seen it, I was intrigued by how nuanced the roots are. The roots are now above land and they're twisted and almost braided, forming this bridge. It's almost a bridge. And so then I started thinking, are these roots forming a bridge of possibilities or perhaps taking someone on their journey? And more significantly, as we talk about roots in this particular picture, how might the conditions or the environment actually triggered it to be above ground and to be twisted in forming this bridge versus under the ground. So the significance of conditions or environment as we talk about roots. Which took me to the next picture. So you can see I was on this rabbit hole of, striking images of roots. What does it really mean? It's significant to me. So, you know, what is it? How does it function? How does it move and groove and change based on what variables? So then I came across this image of this tree, but the roots are climbing up the wall of the building. And so it made me think about roots in terms of our adaptivity and our resilience. Not taking away from roots being the core and a main structure, but how it has to, again, move, adapt, and be based on its environment. So I'm going somewhere with this, so stay with me. And then I thought of Adrian. No, just kidding. I kind of didn't, Adrian, until I see you, but I thought of Roots the band. Roots the band. Adrian Roots, right? Same level. And I thought about how it is an iconic group for the culture, right? So in some ways, it made me say, hey, dance a little, move a little, right? But all these different images. And I am an Xer. So the other image that I won't show you, but I'll tell you that cropped up for me is the image of Alex Haley's Roots. Yeah? Anyone heard of that before? And I remember thinking about some of the emotions of the first time I experienced Roots. And for me, it was a depiction of an enslaved African in America. And it was really illustrating how biases and differences can be vilified and making me question, what are the roots of that? And it's the fear of the unknown. And again, criminalizing or vilifying differences. So roots, those are the images that kind of went through my brain, full speed, plus a million others, but I won't show you those. But it makes me wonder, what associations might you have when you think about roots, or even when you encounter what I lifted up? What does that make you think about? And then how might you define roots? So I want you to think about it, and at this time not do a call and response, but what might you come up with and why? Because most of what we come up with will be based on our roots, our families, our socialization, our education, etc. What might you come up with? Now the nerd in me, because I am a little nerd and I can get nerded out, wanted to find some scholarly definitions to kind of anchor this work or this talk into. And so I just came up with 3 of the common definitions that I came across to describe roots. But I also want you to pay attention to the image on the right, which looks like a silhouette of a little girl with a big afro, and her feet are rooted down into the ground, spreading deeply into the ground, in some ways establishing her, and perhaps giving her more firm ground to stand on to do whatever is next. The 3 primary functions of roots. The primary mechanism is to take in nutrients. That's what roots are for, to take in nutrients. I want you to still be thinking about, so what might that be for you in our community? Nutrients for me is a mechanism of survival. And so what is helping us thrive and survive as an individual and then collectively as a community? Roots. That's one of its primary functions as nutrients. And then 2, it's serving as an anchor or grounds us, establishes us firmly. So when elements come, kind of like the snow and the wind and all of that, we can still root in and be okay. Sometimes it's about our values, our assumptions. And then lastly, it is storage. I think about roots in terms of storage of our values and our assumptions. And again, it's where we operate from. So how I choose to interact with people and form community. So here's one of my main takeaways. So as I was going through all the different images and the definitions, a couple of things bubbled up for me as important. One is that so much of who we are is a manifestation of our roots. So much of who we are is a manifestation of our roots. And I see some of you nodding your head. I appreciate that. You're alive out there. Good, good. So much of who we are is a manifestation of our roots. So as a parent and educator, my mind went to, so some of the primary roots in my family that have helped manifest or help me evolve would be family and school, education. And so I want to continue to go a little deeper in terms of how I was grappling with roots by showing you a couple more pictures, which, oh man, it's a whole lot of people in this picture. You will see my grandmas, my grandpa, my uncles, my aunties, my cousins. There might even be a friend or 2 in that picture. No, really, we're all blood related. But what is significant to me is I remember that this was my first experience of rooting because it was my first community. It is where I learned my relationship to other people, where I learned how to show up, where I learned values and assumptions. So family. I'll tell you, kind of like I started, so now, well, in this picture, if you could see it, I'm about 6. And I'll just embellish now since you can't see. I'm so cute in this picture. so cute. But now I'm one of the elders. In this picture, baby, but now I'm one of the elders. And there are at least 7 to 8 people that are no longer with us. So again, it just really amplifies how time and relationships matter and how we need to pay attention to our roots and what's feeding us in community. And so what I was trying to do is really just show the intergenerational component of our roots and how we're impacted. Because from my larger extended family, it then boiled down to my immediate family with my mom, brother, and siblings. And again, I'm so cute in this picture. And I think at that point, I'm about 8. But if you could see the expression on my face, it was interesting. I don't think I was having any of that photo shoot. But again, just amplifying, family is one of the first places where we understand rooting and community and how we show up for one another. and how important it is in terms of how we respond to other needs. So then it took me to my current family with my husband and I and our 2 kids. And you can't see it, but we're mimicking Black Panther. And so it's a cool picture. And again, I'm so cute in this picture. So you would think that I have this fascination with being cute. I don't. It's more important to be kind and to show up. But the point is, throughout this intergenerational photo shoot of my family, it is also about me understanding the value that were found in the roots of how we intervene for people whom we love or whom we consider a part of our community, and how I'm a mama bear for my kids and as an educator for other people's kids. And as you all think about it, how do you show up in that way for other people? It also was a matter of me thinking about how my family taught me how we intervene. And so one of the questions I want you to continue to think about as we go to the next couple tiles is, how do we intervene on behalf of ourselves and of others in our community when we're rooted and when perhaps other people are not rooted as well? So another takeaway that I want you to think about, I gotta remember that projector is right there. Roots are sustained and established by their ecosystem. Roots are sustained and established by their ecosystem. So I told you my parents, my extended family and school, in many ways, were the roots for me. I would be lying and a bad diversity, equity, and inclusion person if I left it there. What we have to understand is that our roots are also impacted by the environment and the ecosystem. And in learning more about roots, I correlated it with good soil. Soil matters. So you can't just stick something in the earth and expect it to grow. In fact, one of the things that I learned when I was doing my surface level research on this was that there is a chemical reaction that happens in the roots where the soil and the roots also determine how deeply something will go, how quickly, and how far. So the surrounding or the ecosystem of the roots matter. So if you can see this picture, it's of a tree that has toppled over. So the roots are pulled up and the tree has now it's displaced. So pause for a second, try not to say anything or move because I want to read statistics that to me illustrate this point in a very sobering way. In Kent County, that's where we are. I'm not talking about Detroit. I'm not talking about Indianapolis or one of those cities far away. Right here, our home, our community. 1 in 60 white children in Kent County are homeless. 1 in 60 white children are homeless. Let that sink in. Because we've been talking about roots. 1 in 54 Latinx children in Kent County are homeless. So white, 1 in 60, Latinx, 1 in 54. 1 in 7 Black children in Kent County are homeless. So I would have loved to have moved on quicker than that pause, but I mean, every time I hear that, see that hurts. So we were talking about how roots sustain us, establish us, and then I think about babies who are in this situation and how they can't be as deeply rooted as possible or even feel some of the security of being grounded, anchored, or rooted if they're in that situation. And sometimes I think about how we love to, and maybe it's the way we've been socialized, locate the problem in the families, in the root. But what we just were talking about is the ecosystem supports the roots, okay? So there is something that needs to change about this, and some of it is talking about it so there's an awareness, as well as telling the true story of how this has come to be without locating the problem of it in the babies and their families. So what I then tried to show was that tree that's toppled over. Let's be real. That tree didn't just like fall over. That tree was like knocked down, not properly sustained or planted in the first place. And so the correlation that I make with that in terms of being rooted is, and soil mattering is, what that's really amplifying is affordable, livable housing and how there's a significant need for it, as well as livable wages. And you're probably like, what is this educator up here talking about these things? Well, hello. I see the faces and know the stories of the kids that are deeply impacted by this. How can you be rooted when that's your situation? And so again, it makes me think about, recently there was a national report released that talked about if anybody is working minimum wage anywhere in the United States, that there is no affordable housing for them. That's a problem. And that's not about the roots, but the ecosystem. So with that being said, if roots are our anchor, then what does that mean? What does that situation and those stats mean in terms of education? So this image is of me with a big old smile with my doctoral garb on. And the reason why I put this up there is because I have always believed, and I think many of you believe this too, that education is a protective factor. Like there's so much research that talks about how when people are properly educated, that it can change the trajectory of one's life. Because one, the roots, but two, the fruit that come from it. And so then I think about the stats: 1 in 60 white kids, 1 in 54 Latinx kids, 1 in 7 black kids, and I'm talking about kids that are in school. In school. And then you're gonna put an equation in front of me and you want me to solve that? That seems cruel. Yet I know it's the right work because everyone needs the critical thinking and the problem solving, et cetera. But what we also understand about the brain is the brain gets hijacked when it's traumatized. So you couldn't think with your executive function and do optimal learning anyway. Or if you did, you would need 7 more steps to ease your lizard-like brain for you to be able to function. And so what I'm trying to amplify is roots do matter. There's a overlapping or intersection of this housing thing and education. The community really are the roots, as well as the ecosystem that need to, one, be aware of what's happening, make some noise about it, cultivate the land to feed it and to plant it differently as we go forward. In many ways, it seems like a cyclical problem that we'll get into. Because if we know education is a protective factor, something that everybody needs, but if all these school-age children, students are in this situation, I mean, they're starting with very uneven ground and bad soil. Are you tracking with me? And so the question for this community is, how might we serve as roots for this vulnerable portion of our community? How might we serve as roots for this vulnerable population of our community? That's not their community, that's our community. Those are our kids. And there's a group in Africa, I think it's called the Maasai, that talks about, you can tell a lot by the community by how they answered the question of, and how are our children? So what would you say in terms of how our children are based on those stats? And so we have some work to do. The lovely part about being in front of you all, creatives, I have some assumptions about creatives. Like you think outside of the box. Creatives, you think with possibilities. The other bias that I have as I'm looking out is you're millennials, like I'm an Xer. And so I see many of you as millennials. Millennials, or that age group, have always led the way. They have always been the fierce ones to challenge status quo for whatever reason. I'm thinking about the civil rights movement. It's always been the youth to build synergy and to create a movement about things that make no sense. And so my question again for you all is, how might we serve as roots for this vulnerable portion of our community? Okay, thank you. I'm gonna turn back to the staff. All right, so stay here is what you're saying? All right.
All right, we have time for some Q&A, and we also have an extra microphone this time, so I'm not going to be prancing around. What questions do we?
I like that. But what I will do, and I'm sure that you will have questions, or I see you back there, so hold on one second. I want to make sure, I don't know if you have a list of people that are here or email addresses, but I have this link from the Michigan Policy League. I messed that up. Michigan Michigan Public Policy League. And it's a list of links that you can go to in terms of advocating for this very issue. So you have a question in the back.
Someone was feeling inspired from your talk, which was very beautiful. Do you have some favorite Kent County organizations that you're like, go tomorrow and go volunteer, or like offer your help or services or money to?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the organizations that's pulling together a lot of the entities in Grand Rapids, Kent County around this issue is called K-Connect. So if you go to K-Connect, I think you'll see some data, and then I think in the future you'll see even some listings of different events that are happening where you can lend your voice and even learn more. So I would start there. I love what ICCF is doing, what they're trying to do, but I think if you start with K-Connect, that would be the place. I want to amplify this. I'm an educator, so this is not my permanent gig. And so there's some things that I know about this and some things that I don't know. What I know is that I'm enraged by the homelessness. And so any platform that I have, I choose to use it in that way, talking about it. And so might you go deeper and learn more? Okay, cool. My point is move the needle for these babies that are hurting and understand that the deficit is not in them, and continue to create platforms where people can come together to move the needle. Because one of the things that I've learned about Grand Rapids in particular, and I think there's even research or articles about this, is that we are a very philanthropic community. Have you heard that? So we'll give somebody a coat or we'll give somebody a plate. My thing is, how might we go deeper and examine some of the structural things, that soil that might be creating some of these situations, and then move it forward. Yeah, go ahead.
Add one thing to,
Can you pass that mic to her?
answer?
Yeah.
One of the groups connected with K-Connect is a group called Grand Rapids Homes for All, and they are really working on policy that affects homelessness in Grand Rapids. And the other thing I wanted to say is just that in 15 years of working with students, predominantly black students in Grand Rapids, starting in 2000, so just to add to this statistic, like starting in 2007 or 8, I started to see students in the program finding themselves homeless. And from 2007 to 2016, sometimes those very same students were homeless 2 to 3 times a year. I mean, 2 to 3 times throughout that span of years. And it has nothing to do with the love of the parents.
That's
it has
right.
nothing to do with our families not working hard enough.
That's right.
Most of the parents of the students I was working with were at the program all the time, supporting their kids, but also they were working maybe 2 jobs plus going to school. So it has something to do with the environment.
Yeah. Thank you. That's Sharon Lapel, folks. So you can look her up later. She has a lot of knowledge about that. A couple other things that I want to highlight is that some of the research has helped us change the narrative also on homelessness. Like, I'm not about anyone's biases anyway, but there has been a bias about who's homeless and who's not. And what some of the research is illuminating that some homelessness comes from medical debt. That's not anybody's fault. Some homelessness comes from people who went to college and have overwhelming college debt. And so having a more comprehensive conversation about how this came to be and what we need to do about it. And when Sharon was talking, it made me want to illustrate again there were some racial disparities in that stat, or those stats. One kid is one kid too many in my book. We need to get into the nuances of the racial disparities in that as well. Yeah? So that's a hard conversation, and I know in Midwest, sometimes I feel like it's really Grand Rapids, but people tell me, no, Brandy, it's a Midwest thing, that we can be really nice and not want to talk about racial disparities, but it's time. It's time to talk about some of the racial disparities in the stats that we're seeing. So, other questions before we close out?
I just was wondering if you could share a little bit about what drove you to become an educator and kind of how that led to your work now at Kent Schools.
Okay, thank you. So, I actually did not want to be a teacher growing up. And I remember having a mentor who was in the mental health profession. And so initially I went to school to become a counselor, and I worked at community mental health. And what I learned was that concept, again, of how we can demonize people and locate the problems in them without looking at the system. And what I was hearing and seeing was a lot of hurting people and some of the loudness of their life and the intensity. And it made me want to be more proactive and have long-term relationships instead of being in a crisis center. And so I actually applied for a basketball coaching position at a school. And the principal at that time was thinking outside of the box. And he was like, I want you to be our school counselor. So then I went back to school to get the teacher credentials and administrative credentials, blah, blah, blah. But that's how I landed in the school system. And I've fallen in love with our public school system in terms of who it could be for all kids in our community. I was actually having a conversation with Sam earlier about I love the concept and the reality of schools being a community hub where babies go to school and feel safe and are engaged in healing-centered interactions and are learning what they need for life school and other things, and how it also is a place for the adults in the environment to do what they need to do as well. Does that answer your question? Yeah? Okay, thank you. Good, or you want more? And the window is closing for questions. Are there any?
Yay.
She has one right
Yes.
here.
Are there any cities, or have you seen any models or cities
Thank
that
you.
are doing it well, that you feel like that they get it and they're showing some success?
Yeah. This is what I would say. Without naming all the cities, because I can't even remember, I've seen some good practices in terms of, I want to say in the California area or whatnot, I have seen people bringing youth to the table and letting them redesign spaces that might give them agency and empower them, as well as giving them housing. So they were addressing the immediate need of housing as well as the structural things of what do you need to be successful. The beautiful piece about that is, which I think is a motto, is the people who are most impacted by the problem being at the planning table to talk about how it can be redesigned and co-constructed. Excuse me. The other thing that I should lift up is I know that there's an increasing number of people from the LGBT community that are school age that are also homeless based on them being LGBTQ. So that's something else, like that bias is pushing them out of their homes and things. I have seen recently in Atlanta where Mayor Keisha Bottoms, I might be saying her name wrong, but she just raised a significant number of dollars to work on this very issue for Atlanta. So I think there are some communities that are doing something about it. Structures are hard to change, but it is about changing the root issue. It's about not just plucking the babies out of the water that are going down the stream, but going down to see how and why they're getting in the water. So that's the work, the real work. That's the hard work, though.
Any last questions? I'm gonna peek around this way. All right, let's give a warm thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you again, Brandy, so much
you.
for speaking with us. And thank you, Rick and Sovengard, for the beautiful, beautiful space. And we will see you guys next month.